Takeshi was an ordinary bum who managed to land a hot girlfriend unlike you miserable loners. However, when a clumsy mage turns him and his girlfriend into magicians to help fight in secret magic war, he abandons the fight to clap both their magical cheeks instead. It all starts with Takeshi getting ready for school, wishing he can start a new life far away from his family. Minutes later, he heads to school with his hot girlfriend, Kurumi, who quickly notices his mood swing and asks if he is still having trouble at home. After avoiding the subject, they make it to school, so she promises to come see him at the dojo later on before leaving. However, just as he reaches the door, a hottie named Mui suddenly falls out of the door right beside him, so he quickly carries her to the nurse's office. He then tries to wake her up, but she starts asking for her brother before hugging him and begging him to stay. However, as soon as she fully regains consciousness, she shoves him to the floor and pulls out a blaster while demanding to know where they are. He then explains that they are in the nurse's office, but she suddenly gets dizzy again and ends up kissing him by accident. Once again, she pulls out the blaster and almost takes his head off before accusing him of being a creep. But after he reminds her of what happened and says she just took his first kiss, she apologizes. He then notices the magic smoke coming out of her gun and asks about it, but she gets surprised that he can see it and starts apologizing. The next moment, her brother, Tsuganashi, walks in, and after she says something about his memories getting rewritten, 3 others come in to capture her. Takeshi then tries to run out the window, but Tsuganashi freezes it shut, so he decides to face them with his wooden sword. A sword fighter named Takao takes him on, but after several minutes of struggling to land a single hit, Takeshi forces him back with a painful jab to the chest. Takao then decides to go all out and unleashes a powerful flurry of attacks until Takeshi suddenly gains an ability that allows him to predict Takao's moves. After seeing through the last attack, he tells Mui to duck and smacks Takao's hand, causing him to throw the sword straight through Tsuganashi's ice wall. Just as they both escape, a friend of Takeshi's named Kazumi shows up and gets curious when he sees them running, so he tries to catch up. But after Takao and his 4-eyed buddy run by, he stops Hotaru to ask why they are chasing Takeshi, only to get attacked by her magic needle. Mui then gets to a corner with Takeshi and starts apologizing for introducing him to the dangerous world of magic. After she breaks down and says she only wanted to save her brother, he tells her not to worry right before Kurumi shows up and asks if this is the practice he always runs off to. Just then, Takao catches up to them and asks Takeshi for another rematch to test his abilities, but Takeshi gets confused since he barely knows anything about magic. After Mui explains that coming in contact with her magic smoke must have triggered his affinity for it, Senior 4 Eyes tries to grab her, but Kurumi smacks him with her bag and says she has a couple of questions for Mui. He then unleashes a briefcase full of hornets on them as payback, but Takao calls him stupid before a painful reaction causes him to lose every magic cell in his body. Upon seeing this, Kurumi explains that attacking another magician in the regular world causes the user to immediately lose their powers, and when Takeshi asks why it didn't happen to her in the nurse's office, she reminds him that he had not yet activated his powers. After the magic poison from the hornets causes Kurumi to also activate a magic ability that doubles the size of her jugs, Kazumi shows up with Hotaru on his shoulders and asks what is going on. Just then, he also activates an ability to control flames, and while he starts freaking out, Takao resumes his duel with Takeshi. Leap before. He uses his new evasive magic to counter every attack, but quickly realizes that he won't be able to dodge forever, so he signals Mui for support. As Takao then charges in for the final attack, she fires off a powerful beam of light that completely blinds him until Takeshi lands a nasty jab to the throat, with the wannabe samurai taken out. Mui then escorts Takeshi and the others into a magical mirror that takes them to a different world called the Ruined World. A couple of minutes after the grand tour, she takes them to see Hyudo, a nurse who then treats Kurumi's injuries before telling Mui that the headmistress asked for them. Moments later, they get seated in the office and wait until Momoka reveals herself and welcomes them to the Magic Academy. Mui immediately stands to apologize for getting them involved, but Momoka ignores her to ask if they have any idea how the Ruined World came about. Naturally, they all say it's their first time hearing about magic, so Momoka explains the Great Magic War from 16 years ago, where a powerful mage who founded the Ghost Trailers tried to wipe out all of humanity so magicians could reign supreme. He had already casted a spell called Final Requiem that would have destroyed the entire planet, but the 15 most powerful mages at the time combined their abilities to split the world into 2, essentially creating the Ruined World to take the damage while the real world was spared. Soon after this, another immensely powerful mage called the Wise Man casted a spell called Gift on the living world to make sure that any magician who attacked another while on that side would immediately lose their abilities. After a crash course explaining the different classes of magic that exist, Momoka tells them to choose between enrolling into the academy or losing all their magic and returning to the regular world. Kurumi then tries to convince Takeshi that giving up magic is the logical thing to do, but he takes one look at Mui and takes the obvious choice to stay and master his new powers. After Kazumi also decides to stay, Kurumi reluctantly agrees, so Momoka tells Mui that they will be starting in the first year's C class and says she will be demoted from her class to join them as punishment. On getting to the dorm building minutes later, Mui once again apologizes for turning their lives upside down, but Kazumi assures her that it's nothing they can't handle, so she proceeds to give them a tour of the place. Back in the regular world the following day, Takeshi's brother Jeku asks his mom if she knows anything about why he would suddenly transfer to a new school with Kurumi, but Yoko completely avoids the subject and tells him to focus on preparing for his entrance exams. By then, Takeshi and the others have just started their first class with a teacher named Makoto, who then explains the importance of an aspect, which is basically what they use to channel magic, after Kurumi realizes that her aspect is the lip gloss that reacted when she first got her powers. Kazumi also realizes that his ring channels the flame magic, but Takeshi gets confused about his, so Makoto calls him out to appraise his magic. Upon learning that he is an evasive magic user, he instructs Mui to take him down to the weapons shop, and as soon as they leave, Kazumi starts teasing Kurumi about what they might be doing behind her back. While walking through the hallway moments later, Takeshi asks Mui about her aspect, so she pulls out the blaster and explains how long she has had it before telling him about how she and Shuganashi are pure-blood magicians because their parents both inherited their abilities naturally. After saying that being a pure blood is often valued in several magic communities, she tells him to take his time weighing out the options before making a decision about which community he wants to join. Just a few minutes later, they arrive at the weapons shop and meet Kato, the one-eyed geezer who runs the place. After introducing himself, he tells Takeshi to find something he likes, but Takeshi gets confused by all the available options and asks for something close to his bamboo sword, so Kato hands him a dark sword. He then explains that the former user was one of the 15 greatest magicians who also used evasive magic before she decided to give up her powers to live a normal life. Upon hearing this, Takeshi uncovers the blade to test it out, but then they see a magic circle on it, and Mui immediately asks if it's safe since using a weapon with another magician's circle on it can be extremely dangerous. Kato then says it won't be a problem since Takeshi uses evasive magic before suddenly grabbing a random sword and attacking him. Despite being caught off guard, Takeshi manages to block all his attacks, but the sword suddenly starts draining his magic until a cartridge appears. As soon as he drops, Kato explains that he just gained full control of the sword and gives him 3 bullets that will enable him to transform the sword depending on which kind of magician he is fighting. With that, they both head back to class and see that Kazumi nearly sent everyone to the afterlife. But Makoto tells them it's nothing to worry about since stuff like this happens all the time, while Kurumi then explains that their class is actually known for teaching the worst magicians in the academy. A low-budget gojo named Kippy picks up a blonde chick named Violet and glazes her for taking out an entire squad of wizard braces before they leave. Days later, Takeshi and the others head to the arena for an early morning training session, but he ends up struggling with his sword the entire time until Kurumi's melons become the center of attraction. After he tells her to transform smaller next time, Mui calls her to get changed, but this confuses the boys, so they both ask when she started getting friendly with Mui. Kurumi then claims that Mui is just too friendly and heads out with her to the dressing room. While she changes minutes later, Mui pulls out 2 tickets for a spirit reading from the most famous seer around campus, but Kurumi refuses to even acknowledge them until Mui mentions that some students use it to get accurate readings about their love life. Upon grabbing one of the tickets, she sees Mui's melons and instantly gets insecure since she still only has seeds on her chest. So she starts asking a bunch of questions about how she grew them until Mui gets embarrassed. After spending all of gym class in an awkward silence, they continue feeling embarrassed on the way back to class, so Takeshi and Kazumi ask if something happened between them. The next moment, 2 chicks walk by and call Mui a traitor before Makoto shows up and says they are members of the Wizard Brace. At a bench a couple of minutes later, he explains that there are over 50 magic communities in their world, but only 7 are recognized by the International Magicians Association. Of those 7 communities, the Wizard Brace remains at the very top as the most powerful, and since they strongly opposed the ghost trailers, Mui, who was also part of the Wizard Brace, got labeled as a traitor because of Shuganashi's actions. Upon hearing this, Takeshi remembers the night Jeku called him a traitor as well, but Kurumi snaps him out of it and drags them both to class. Later on, Takeshi walks in on a group of guys trading hot pics of Kurumi, so he grabs them all and tells the guys to stop, so they ask why he even cares. Just as he says that they are actually dating, Mui walks in and suddenly gets emotional before running past Kurumi, who then sees Takeshi's sad face and realizes that he might feel a certain way about Mui. Later on, she notices how he keeps glancing over at her during classes and gets even more upset, so she goes for the reading and asks about the future of her relationship with him. After the seer says he will look for another kitty to clap in the near future, she refuses to accept it and runs off. However, while running, she thinks back to just a couple of hours earlier when Mui found her on the stairs and told her about the accidental kiss she shared with Takeshi. She then spots Takeshi across the hall and tries to recreate the same kiss by running into him, but he holds her mouth shut and asks if she is okay. Upon learning that she is mad about the kiss with Mui, he asks why she is so upset about it, so she reminds him that they are in a relationship. The next moment, he asks if they can stop pretending to be together, but this catches her off guard, so she runs off again. While practicing a couple of days later, Kazumi asks him why she has been ditching their usual routine, causing Takeshi to realize that she has also been avoiding them completely since the incident. On his way out moments later, Mui stops him to ask if she is the reason Kurumi stopped talking to them, but he tells her not to worry and pats her on the head while Kurumi watches. Later on, she sees Kurumi in the ladies' room and tries to talk about everything, but Kurumi suddenly starts asking if she likes anyone before walking out. However, on her way back to class, a random Chad asks her out on a date, so she quickly shuts him down and claims to still be in a relationship with Takeshi. As she then turns to leave, he grabs her shoulder to try again, but this suddenly reminds her of a traumatic incident and causes her to become paralyzed with fear. Thankfully, Takeshi shows up and chases the wannabe Riz Lord away before checking on her, while making sure she is okay. He remembers how they decided to start the fake relationship just to stop creeps from attacking her. He then tells her that they don't have to stop talking to each other just because he doesn't want to continue the fake relationship. Around the same time, Geku joins Yoko for dinner and suddenly says he feels like making up with Takeshi. He then thinks back to the day Takeshi told him about the relationship with Kurumi. Upon hearing that they were actually dating, he got pissed and started walking away, so Takeshi tried to talk him down. But at the last moment, he seemingly got possessed by something that caused him to push Geku right in front of a speeding car. With his trip down memory lane complete, Geku drags himself up the stairs and regains his hatred for Takeshi. Back in the academy, Kurumi sees the pictures Takeshi seized from the guys in class and starts teasing him about it before letting him keep one and running off before he can remind her that their fake lovers deal is off. As he then stares at the picture, Mui, who had been watching the entire time, decides to go get a reading, while Kurumi continues wondering if he now likes her. However, instead of asking about Takeshi's love interest when she finally gets to the Seer's shrine, Mui asks for help tracking her brother and ends up deep in the ruined world minutes later. The next morning, Kazumi almost incinerates his hand while trying to force his magic into Takeshi's bullet. He then considers giving up, but when Takeshi reveals that he has also been struggling with summoning the cartridge, they both agree to keep trying. The next moment, Kurumi runs in to tell them that Mui never came back to the dorm last night, and after she shows them a map of the ruined world, Takeshi runs off to show Makoto, who then says there is nothing they can do about it. When Takeshi asks why he is being so casual about the situation, Makoto explains that there is actually a war currently happening in the ruined world, and since Momoka is not available, making any moves would be incredibly risky for the academy. Despite this, Takeshi starts trying to find his own way out, and when Kazumi reminds him that they are still low-level rookies who barely have control over their magic, he insists that saving Mui is more important than anything else. Upon hearing this, Kurumi gets emotional and asks why he is acting foolish, but he still refuses to stay back and explains how he understands the pain Mui feels because of his damaged relationship with Geku. Naturally, this causes Kurumi to get even more emotional, so she runs off. Meanwhile, Mui continues her search and thinks back to when Suganashi was just her innocent older brother who still struggled to control his magic. Later on, Takeshi finally locates a door to leave the academy, but Kazumi stops him and decides to come along. After Kurumi also shows up to make sure they both stay safe, they hear footsteps and quickly hide as senior students open the doors and pass through a portal. The next moment, they also jump into the portal and almost puke while flying through, but the real shock sets in when they make it to the other side and see just how bad the ruined world really is. Just then, a cloaked lady asks why they left the academy, so Takeshi describes Mui with the hope that she has some answers about where she ran off to. However, the cloaked lady claims that she never passed through the portal and warns them to head back inside before a black blob suddenly crashes onto her barrier. After Dollar Store Venom returns to his regular form, a flame user like Kazumi sends him to the afterlife, and Kurumi immediately grabs Takeshi as they all realize that what Makoto said about the war is true. However, instead of turning back, he runs straight into the danger zone, so Kurumi and Kazumi follow behind him. By then, Mui has just been thrown into a fence by Suganashi, who then reveals that the seer who is actually Violet gave her the fake location so they could finally capture her. When she refuses to go with him and says he has to go with her instead, he starts laughing and claims he has no memory of being her brother before grabbing her by the neck to cut off her oxygen supply. When he commends her resilience, she reminds him that she was the one who bought his gloves as a birthday present, but he refuses to believe his own memories and drains all her energy. Moments later, Takeshi finally makes it to the rooftop, but upon seeing her lying unconscious on the ground, he gets pissed and charges in to attack Suganashi. After he calls him stupid for hurting the one person trying to save him, Suganashi tells him to stop trying to make it sound like she is actually his sister. He then takes off and unleashes a deadly ice skill that knocks Takeshi off his feet. The next moment, he activates a spell to trap him in ice, but Kazumi pushes him out of the way a second earlier and ends up trapped in the mini iceberg. Upon seeing this, Takeshi immediately tries to cut through the ice, but Kazumi tells him to focus on Mui instead, so he runs off to fight Suganeshi. Kazumi then reminisces about the day Takeshi protected his little sister from thugs and taught him the importance of being the older one. However, his blast to the past suddenly gets interrupted by the lack of oxygen in the iceberg, so Kurumi tries to ask Takeshi for help but sees that he already has his hands full fighting off Suganeshi. After another failed attempt to speak to Suganeshi's humanity, Takeshi predicts his next move and tells Kurumi to duck before using one of Suganeshi's ice daggers to shatter the iceberg. With Kazumi now safe, he rushes over with Mui and asks if he can now channel magic into the bullet, but Kazumi asks for more time, so he heads back out to face Suganeshi. This time, Suganeshi decides to join him on the ground for a contest of skill, and as they both start clashing swords, Kurumi channels her healing magic to revive Mui while Kazumi desperately tries to force his magic into the bullet. After Suganeshi gets tired of the sword fight and uses his ice daggers to knock Takeshi off his feet again, the girls run in to protect him, so he starts charging up his sword to activate the cartridge for Kazumi's bullet. When Kazumi finally gets the bullet ready, Takeshi loads up the cartridge and fires up the sword with Kazumi's flames before blasting Suganeshi until he drops from the sky. Just as Mui tries to rush over, Takeshi stops her because he just sensed someone else. So Kippi reveals himself and commends Takeshi on trusting his instincts before offering Mui a spot on the ghost trailers and leaving with Suganeshi. Several minutes later, they all return to the academy and end up in Momoko's office, where she shuns them for taking on such a reckless mission. After explaining just how dangerous it was, she tells them to promise never to make a mistake again, but Takeshi refuses and says he will keep doing everything in his power to help Mui because she definitely won't be giving up on her brother anytime soon. Upon hearing this, Momoko admits that she didn't expect Takeshi to be so determined and decides to give them a chance to prove their strength. Meanwhile, Kippi meets up with Violet to describe what went down so she can find Takeshi at the academy and stop him from ever interrupting again. Several weeks later, a dungeon appears in the academy for the sole purpose of testing all the first years and seeing if Takeshi and the others are strong enough to go on a mission to rescue Suganeshi. Shortly after setting up the dungeon, Makoto explains the first level to all the students, and upon learning that they just have to reach the tallest building in a small town, they run off to complete the level. However, after a bunch of machine gun spiders appear and start blasting rounds at anyone they see, they all scatter to find safety. Several minutes into it, Takeshi spots Takao casually walking through a part of the town, so he stops in and demands to know what he wants. Takao then asks who he is, causing him to get caught off guard as he still clearly remembers almost losing his head during their fight back in the regular world. Once again, he starts asking Takao why a member of the Ghost Trailers is also taking the test, but after calling him stupid for even thinking that he is one of the bad guys, Takao walks off to continue the test. While Takeshi keeps trying to figure out what just happened, Momoko meets up with Makoto to tell him that they need to keep an eye on the students to avoid the number of casualties they had the previous year. He then takes that opportunity to tell her about Takao and how their memory reconstruction spell seems to be working perfectly, and she responds by reminding him that they need every fighter they can get for the war. As the test progresses and becomes even more dangerous, Violet shows up with two mages from the Ghost Trailers and uses dark magic to infiltrate the dungeon. The next moment, Takeshi, who was just about to get crushed by a giant rhino, gets teleported to a maze. At the same time, Kurumi also gets confused by the dark portals appearing and ends up exposed to an earth golem, so Takao jumps in to save her and cuts the golem down with one swing of his sword. He then asks if she left her brain in the dorm before coming out, but she gets confused seeing him act so kind and asks if he is not the same person that fought Takeshi. Upon hearing this, he remembers the chat with Takeshi earlier and tries to ask more questions, but his injuries cause the dungeon censors to send him to the infirmary for treatment. Just then, Kazumi finds Kurumi, so they both meet up with Takeshi and Mui to figure out what is going on. When Kurumi mentions what happened with Takao, Takeshi also tells her about their conversation, and Mui immediately realizes that his memories were edited, but she tells him to focus on clearing the dungeon. They then combine their efforts to figure out the maze, but as they finally start heading to the exit, an even more powerful golem drops in, so Takeshi activates his evasive magic to predict its moves. However, it still forces him back, so Mui takes over with her blaster, but her most powerful shot barely leaves a scratch on it. On seeing this, Kazumi tries to charge up his fist, but it immediately starts attacking, so he decides to use the magic bullet like before. Seeing as he had already infused his flame magic earlier on, he throws it to Takeshi, but his terrible aim ruins the entire plan, so Takeshi tells the girls to keep the golem distracted. However, after Kurumi's trash talk works a little too well, Kazumi rushes in to block the golem's punch and ends up stuck in a bush. Thankfully, Takeshi finally manages to equip the bullet and transforms his sword with Kazumi's magic before blowing the golem up with one slice. The next moment, they all notice a bunch of playing cards flying towards the portals, and while Mui starts suspecting Violet, she decides to take Takeshi's sword for herself at all costs. In Momoka's office later that day, Hyudu gives her a shoulder massage while they discuss how she knew that ghost trailers are in the academy. After she claims that it's all a part of her plan, Hyudu reminds her that Takeshi and the others have proven themselves strong enough to go retrieve Suganashi. She then tries to massage Momoka's magic kitty, but she immediately tells her to stop. At school the following evening, Kurumi gets upset with Takeshi because he has refused to go back home to celebrate New Year's with his family. When Mui tries to calm her down, she calls him a liar for going back on their promise to visit the festival shrine together and get a lucky charm for Geku's exam. Upon hearing this, Takeshi gets up to defend himself and says he has a personal reason for not going back, but she refuses to listen to another word and runs off. Hours later, she returns home and continues sulking about it until she hears the doorbell and sees Geku, who then welcomes her back and suggests going to the shrine together. After agreeing to it, she expresses her anger at Takeshi for not coming and tells Geku to consider making up with him. But Geku claims that he is the one actually avoiding a conversation. Just then, he tells her that they won't have to keep up the fake relationship because he has decided to transfer to their high school. While she tries to take in the shock from what he just said, Kippi and Suganashi start plotting to use it to their advantage. The following day, Mui completes an intense training session with Takeshi and explains how important it is to push himself to the absolute limit every day if he wants to master his sword's ability. She then tells him to relax on the cold floor, but after seeing her cakes right in front of him, he decides to head back inside. She then tries to hold him down, but he notices that she is running up a fever and carries her out to find Kyudo. Minutes later, he ends up tucking her into bed and thanks his luck that no one saw him entering the female dorm. However, as he turns to leave, she suddenly pulls him into the bed and mistakes him for Suganashi before yanking off her melon wraps and dunking his head into her milk jugs. After a couple of minutes of cuddling, he finally manages to escape her grip. But then Kurumi returns at the worst possible moment and immediately attacks him for trying to get freaky in her room. She then wakes Mui up and chases her out as well, but Mui gets confused and runs off to find Takeshi right before Kurumi starts bawling her eyes out and activates her powers by accident. Shortly after this, Mui catches up to Takeshi at a fountain and yells for him to follow her back to the room, but he refuses and proceeds to explain the truth about his relationship with Kurumi. He further tells her that she needs to learn how to protect herself without needing him, so Mui agrees to leave her alone. Several days later, Kurumi tries to find him in the library but ends up seeing Takao, so she takes the opportunity to thank him for saving her in the dungeon before asking if his injuries are fully healed. After saying that she doesn't have to worry about him, he suddenly pulls her in close and wipes away a teardrop from her eye, but this causes her heart to malfunction, so she runs off and bumps into Takeshi. A couple days later, Momoka assembles the squad for the mission to retrieve Suganashi and hands Mui a special bullet to fix his selective amnesia without causing much damage. As soon as she prepares the portal door into the ruined world, Takao and Hotaru get forced into the office, but instead of fighting back, he decides to follow orders and heads into the portal. When they all make it to the other side, Kippi pulls up with Suganashi, so Momoka requests for the hostage exchange they agreed on. Upon hearing this, Hotaru loses it and asks what is going on, so Takao thinks back to when he saw Takeshi in the dungeon and tells her to accept that they are actually ghost trailers who got caught. When she starts arguing about how she would never abandon the wizard brace to join the ghost trailers, he tells her to shut up and accept reality because they do not have the time for a debate. Kurumi then stops him from leaving to thank him for saving her once again, so he tells her to work on getting stronger and places a special device in her palm before pushing Hotaru ahead. While they both return to the ghost trailers, Suganashi heads toward Mui for one last showdown, and Momoka prepares another portal to escort Kippi to the site for their duel. As soon as they leave, Suganashi charges up his magic to finally shut Mui up, but Hyudu tells him to focus on getting past her alpha team first. He then starts with the usual ice daggers, but she easily blocks them with a powerful water shield before her teammates combine their magic to create a massive trapdoor right below Suganashi. However, despite managing to force him inside it, they still get dropped by his icicles, and after he jumps out and heads deeper into the city, Mui chases after him. Hyudu then tells Takeshi to focus on getting her back in one piece if they fail to capture Suganashi. By then, Momoka and Kippi have just made it to the airspace above an old bridge for their duel, but he decides to start off by reminding her that he was actually her mentor at a certain point. After saying that she should have murked him back then, she promises to get revenge for what happened to a guy called Mitaka, but Kippi immediately claims to have no idea what happened as well. When she asks why several eyewitnesses saw him hovering over Mitaka's body, he insists that he had nothing to do with it, so she activates her weapon to beat the truth out of him. Just then, he also fires off his magic and tries to test her abilities with a lightning-fast attack, but she easily sees through it and blocks. So he covers the entire airspace with dark particles before reminding her of his destructive magic. After saying that she has 13 minutes before it fully melts her body, he asks for a serious fight, so she charges in and unleashes a deadly barrage of combos, but he still manages to land the first hit. This causes her to get pissed, so she channels her magic into a powerful slice that cuts the entire bridge in half. He then commends her on getting so strong on her own, but says it's all pointless since she can't stop the effect of his particles. The next moment, she starts using portals to get closer and suddenly creates a bomb box to end it all. So he tries to escape, but she latches onto his leg and pulls him into it before setting off the explosion. However, her body continues disintegrating, so she tries to figure out a new plan since unaliving him should have stopped any magical skills he activated. When he suddenly bursts out of the ocean, she admits to being surprised that he could survive such a powerful blast. So he takes some time to glaze himself before asking if she is doing all this just to prepare for when a guy called Kazuma wakes up. Upon hearing this, Momoka decides to stop playing games and opens up a portal to space to suck him in. However, his destructive magic also starts taking a toll on her body, but she manages to hold on until he gets sucked away. Meanwhile, Mui and the boys have just made it into Suganashi's ice palace, so Kazumi tries to blast through the top, but his flames only cause a coat of ice to fall apart. As he then prepares for another blast, they get attacked by ice pillars and start evading like their lives depend on it. Luckily, Kazumi prepared another bullet for Takeshi ahead of the mission, but after loading it up in the cartridge, Takeshi tries to transform the sword and almost loses both arms to a sudden explosion that sends the sword up a few floors. When Mui asks Kazumi if he paid attention to the level or magic he fed into the bullet, he realizes that it was his mistake, but Takeshi decides to focus on getting the sword back. Just as he grabs it, Suganashi freezes his arm in place, so Mui jumps through the ceiling to go talk to him again, while Kazumi tries to melt the ice around Takeshi's arm. While she faces off with him, Takeshi starts to realize that it was her commitment to saving Suganashi that made him so obsessed, because unlike her, he had long given up on saving his relationship with Gekko. As he then tells Kazumi to blow the entire thing up, Mui tries to explain how lonely she has been without Suganashi, but the pain from his mind desperately trying to remember causes him to freak out, so he fires off a blast to push her back. Just as he prepares another one, Kazumi blows up the entire castle and frees Takeshi, who then jumps in front of Mui and asks Suganashi how he can be so cruel to the one person that hasn't given up on him. The next moment, tears start streaming down his face, so Mui immediately loads up the special bullet Momoka gave her and waits until Takeshi and Kazumi jump out of the way before blasting Suganashi. At the academy the following day, Momoka wakes up in a half-mummy costume and apologizes to Hyudo for being too weak, before saying that she has to keep fighting to make sure Kazuma remains in a weakened state. Hyudo then stops her and explains how she intends to spend the next few weeks doing absolutely anything she wants. But Momoka quickly gets creeped out as she realizes that Hyudo just wants to play out her freaky fantasies. Meanwhile, Suganashi, who has also just woken up in the infirmary, hugs Mui and promises to never leave her again. Around the same time, Kippy reminisces on how he managed to survive space before meeting up with Violet, who then asks if he has found a replacement for Suganashi. When she and two other potential replacements start mocking him for choosing Suganashi, he sends them up to the Lord in an instant and tells Violet to focus on Kazuma's reawakening before introducing Suganashi's replacement. In a dream several nights later, Takeshi finds himself paralyzed in a large pool of blood, and as he struggles to get up, Kurumi suddenly shows up and frantically asks for his help. The next moment, a monster appears and latches onto her, so she gives him one last kiss before getting blown to bits. After waking up and getting his breathing under control, he goes back to bed without realizing that his sword has been draining magic from his body to use its human form. The following day, Suganashi displays some of his abilities to Takeshi and everyone else in class to make sure they understand how important the basics are. Over an hour later, Mui sees that Takeshi has run out of breath, so she apologizes for Suganashi's intensity, but Takeshi claims to be okay with it as long as it helps him get stronger. When she suddenly hands him a pack of chocolates and reminds him that it's Valentine's Day, Suganashi starts asking a bunch of questions about her feelings for him until she gets embarrassed and drags him away. Kurumi then uses that opportunity to also give him a box of chocolates, but instead of being clear about her feelings, she acts nonchalant and claims to have already accepted that he won't like it. After he thanks her for it, she offers to show him a nice marshmallow spot so he can get return gifts for her and Mui. In a dream later that night, he finds himself in the clouds and gets confused when Mui suddenly shows up and starts running towards a large pudding. As he desperately tries to stop her, she completely ignores him and eventually falls right through the clouds before he wakes up. Just as he steps outside for some air, Suganashi returns from important work and asks if he is okay, so he mentions the recent dreams. Suganashi then explains that most nightmares are actually caused by magic before telling him to go see Hyudo if the symptoms get any worse. In the infirmary the following day, he gets surprised when Mui explains how she tricked while rushing to the cafeteria for pudding, but as he tries to piece it all together, his brain decides to reboot. Minutes later, he wakes up in one of the beds, and Hyudo tells him to focus on getting all the sleep he has missed since the girls have already gone back to class. However, a couple minutes into his peaceful slumber, he ends up in another dream and watches a face-off between Kippy and his sword's human form, Twilight. Just then, Hyudo sees Twilight draining his magic, so she immediately starts slapping him until he wakes up. After asking why he never thought to mention the nightmares to her, she explains how they are considered to be the most accurate predictions of future events because it's almost impossible to change them even after having the dream. She further explains how dangerous it would be to keep letting Twilight drain his magic before telling him to keep the sword far away from his bed before sleeping at night. Despite this, he still places Twilight right next to him that very night, but this time, he ignores most of the dream to connect with her instead. The next day, Momoka calls him to her office to give him a choice between handing the sword over to her or doing what he would have said. When he tries to refuse, she holds him at pencil point and asks why on earth he would be happy with his current situation. So he explains how seeing the dreams might help him prepare for what lies ahead. Upon hearing this, Momoka decides to help him take control of Twilight, but says he has to fight her in the dream. This causes him to get worried since a loss might be the end for him, but she promises to make sure it never gets to that point. In the infirmary minutes later, Mui shows up to join him and refuses to take no for an answer. So Hyudev starts the spell to put them both into deep sleep while Momoka fortifies their magic for extra strength. The next moment, Takeshi finds himself in an arena and gets confused until Mui finds him and explains that they are in his dream. Once outside, they end up at a beach. So Mui immediately bolts for the water, but suddenly gets shocked when Takeshi's freaky mind swaps her uniform for a hot bikini. This causes her to trip, so he tries to save her but ends up unlocking her plot cover in the process. As she then runs into the water to keep her assets covered, he spots Twilight on a swing and starts running towards her. However, after suddenly getting transported to a frozen lake, he sees Yoko trying to tell him something about Geku and tries to get closer, but she vanishes right before he takes a nasty hit to the shoulder. Upon seeing that it's Geku, he gets confused and wonders if this is also another prediction or just Twilight trying to mess with him. Just then, she finally returns to her original form, so he grabs the sword to fight, but she warns him that it would be pointless because he is not nearly as strong as the original owner. After also transforming her arm into a sword, she attacks, and he quickly realizes that she was right about him being weak, so Mui jumps in to help and almost gets split in half. To make him give up, Twilight then starts draining her magic, but as he considers it, Mui tells him not to give up just yet. Twilight immediately tries to shut her up for good, but when he rushes in to save her, she decides to drain his magic as well. He then drops to his knees and thinks about how he always wished Yoko would acknowledge him before suddenly realizing what Twilight really wants. As soon as she raises her sword for one last slice, he apologizes for not recognizing that she is a lot more than just his sword and decides to change her name to Eterna. Upon hearing this, she drops to her knees and reverts to her original form, so Mui rushes to congratulate him with a hug. Over a month later, Geku returns home and excitedly tells Yoko that he finally got into the school he has been talking about for the past few weeks. Meanwhile, Takeshi has just taken Kurumi out to get the marshmallows she was asking for the other day. After also telling her about his new relationship with Eterna, they start discussing what might be in store for their second year in the academy. At the start of the new session several weeks later, Takeshi and Kurumi join the welcoming committee to greet all the new students and suddenly freeze in shock when Kazumi shows up with his sister, Futaba, and says she just enrolled into the academy. After she greets them both, they ask how she became a magician. So Kazumi tells them about one night a couple weeks ago when she got invited to a birthday party filled with boys from her class. Naturally, he refused to let her go, and when she started arguing with him, he lost control of his powers and almost blew up their apartment. As a result, the magic particles from his flames reacted to her body and ended up giving her abilities as well. As he continues trying to explain the full story, Futaba tells him to stop embarrassing her and runs away, so he chases after her. The next moment, Takeshi and Kurumi hear a familiar voice calling out to them and struggle to believe their eyes upon seeing Geku, who then greets them with a smile like they have been besties forever. Takeshi immediately asks how he became a magician, but he avoids the question and says he had to go for the orientation before running off. As the days progress, he continues avoiding that topic, so Takeshi eventually gets tired of asking. However, after seeing him in the boys' bath a couple nights later, he reluctantly joins in the water and tries to figure out the right way to pop the question. Just then, he sees the scar on Geku's leg and changes his mind, but as he gets up to leave, Geku offers to scrub his back. While washing it a couple minutes later, he apologizes for being so bitter over the last couple of years and claims he always knew that the accident wasn't really Takeshi's fault. This catches Takeshi off guard, so he remains silent and listens while Geku continues talking about how they should return to being brothers like before. When Takeshi finally turns to accept the apology, he remembers one of his nightmares where Geku was out for blood but decides to accept that it was just Eterna messing with him. As the days go on, they start getting closer like before and even assist each other during the usual training sessions. Meanwhile, Suganashi continues teasing Mui about what she feels for Takeshi. During lunch one afternoon, Takeshi grabs his food to join everyone at a table, but then he runs into Makoto, who then starts talking about how he has to guide Geku because he has a different worldview than the average younger brother. This confuses Takeshi a little, but he dismisses it as just wishful thinking and proceeds to join the others at their table. However, while sleeping later that night, he experiences another nightmare where Jeku steals Eterna from him and promises to take everything he holds dear by force. After waking up, Takeshi sees Kippy watching from the window and immediately grabs Eterna, but Kippy tells him to relax because he could have easily murked him while he was asleep. Takeshi then asks what he wants, so he offers to give him an updated version of the story Momoka told him when they first showed up at the academy. Centuries ago, the wizard brace started monopolizing the use of magic across the globe, and even went as far as unletting anybody that refused to abide by their rules, although several other factions sprung up over the years and allowed for a free use of magic. The wizard brace continued seeking to remain at the top by recruiting the most powerful magicians they could find into their ranks. One of those magicians was Kazuma, the leader of the Ghost Trailers, who at one point was also a student of the academy and a close friend to Kippy and a guy named Tsukiyomi. Back then, he was already famous for his immense mastery of magic, but when Kippy and Tsukiyomi asked why he had not joined the wizard brace, he expressed his utter refusal to be used as an instrument of war and said he would only use his magic however he saw fit. This didn't sit right with the higher-ups because just a few days later, a top representative of the wizard brace came to see him and basically explained that he would not be allowed to remain as a free agent with the level of magic he had. Once again, he made it clear that his magic was not to be controlled by any organization, but things quickly took a dark turn when the representative showed him live fee from his family home where his parents were being held captive to force him into joining the wizard brace. Upon seeing this, Kazuma lost it and immediately unleashed his final Requiem spell to completely erase the representative from existence. Soon after this, his parents were unalived, so he started the Ghost Trailers to free any magician who was being forced to use their magic for evil. But this triggered the start of the Great Magic War 16 years ago. After days of an endless bloodbath, Kazuma found one of the 15 great magicians and tried to use his final Requiem spell on her, but Tsukiyomi jumped in at the last moment to protect her. After he got extinguished like a used matchstick, Yoko dropped to her knees, and Kazuma also experienced a level of pain similar to when his parents got murked. Upon hearing all this, Takeshi freezes in shock as he never expected to hear that his mom was one of the 15 greatest magicians, but Kippy assures him that it's all true and suggests that he asks Momoka about it if he still has doubts. Takeshi then demands to know what he wants, so Kippy offers him a spot with the Ghost Trailers, and when he refuses, Kippy asks for the sword because it serves as proof of Tsukiyomi's sacrifice. Once again, Takeshi refuses and says he will not be choosing the Ghost Trailers, so Kippy tells him to think on it and assures him that the truth will be revealed eventually thanks to his prediction magic. The next day, Takeshi heads straight to Momoka's office to ask if his mom was actually one of the 15 greatest magicians. When she says it's true, he then tries to ask about who unalived Kazuma's parents, but his magic suddenly reveals an answer that leaves him stunned, so he runs off. Around the same time, Kazuma opens his eyes and sees Kippy watching over him before falling unconscious again with tears streaming down his face. Just then, Kippy wakes up and calls Violet over to ask if it's finally time, but she tells him not to bother trying to wake him because he will regain his strength in stages until the day of his true reawakening. Several nights later, Kazuma finally wakes up to a room filled with all the top representatives of the Ghost Trailers, and Kippy immediately explains how long it has been before asking for new orders. Kazuma then tells them to resume the war against the wizard brace as soon as possible. In class the next day, Takeshi ponders on one of his nightmares where he saw a red dragon and tries to figure out some kind of solution in case it actually happens. Just as Mui tells him it's time for the next class, an earthquake rocks the entire academy. The next moment, Takeshi sees the red dragon from his nightmare and quickly grabs Eterna, but upon seeing the shards of glass about to hit Kurumi, he fires magic beams to shatter them. Kazumi then runs off to find Futaba, so Takeshi grabs the girls and takes off before the dragon starts burning up every exposed classroom. In a matter of minutes, the entire academy gets destroyed, and most of the students get captured by a magic faction called the Pendragons. After Kazumi's search for Futaba ends up putting him in even more danger, Takeshi and Kurumi run off to find Jeku while Mui starts looking for Suganashi. Moments later, she gets surrounded on both sides by Pendragon magicians and manages to block a fiery attack from the first group. However, this leaves her wide open to a sword attack, but Suganashi shows up at the last moment to protect her. Around the same time, Momoka also gets a surprise visit from 3 Pendragon magicians, who then remind her that they were the only team she couldn't defeat during the first war. After she tells them to skip the small talk, the first guy turns her office into a vacuum that neutralizes her abilities. But when Little Miss yaps a lot activates a life-draining skill to unalive her, Momoka casually stares back like nothing happened, leaving them all at a loss for words. She then breaks down the vacuum before explaining how she created a tiny portal right behind the second guy because she could tell his job is to protect anyone that holds on to him. They still try to wrap their heads around how she could easily defeat them, so she sucks them into one of her black boxes to avoid another yap session. Just then, Violet shows up and acts like the three slow-brained geeks actually meant something to her until Momoka tells her to cut to the chase. The next moment, Violet summons a chocolate-flavored Valkyrie and sends her to murk Momoka. But after seeing that it will take a lot more than that to win, she summons the Red Dragon as well. Upon seeing this, Momoka tries to cook up a powerful spell, but she gets tail-whipped and ends up buried under rubble. Shortly after this, Mui and Suganashi carry Kazumi to the infirmary and beg Kyuru to check on him immediately, so she places him on the bed and runs a quick checkup before assuring them that he just needs to rest. By then, Takeshi and Kurumi have just found Geku, so she tries to run to him, but Takeshi suddenly holds her back as his abilities suddenly get triggered by Geku's evil intentions. When he asks Geku why he is really in the academy, Geku decides to stop faking the happy brother act and admits that he joined the ghost trailers after Kippy taught him how to use magic. Upon hearing this, Kurumi tells him to stop working with them, but he refuses and says he needs their help to become strong enough for his revenge. The next moment, he suddenly appears behind Takeshi and almost carves out his spine. He then continues landing hits faster than Takeshi can reach, while Kurumi watches her crush get beat up and desperately tries to stop Geku. After forcing Takeshi down and stabbing through his shoulder, Geku finally gives him a break, so Kurumi rushes in to protect him and asks why he is going this far. Geku then explains that his teleportation ability, paired with the fact that he can finally walk freely, obviously means that he was destined to punish Takeshi for his betrayal. Upon hearing this, Takeshi pulls himself back up and tells Kurumi to stay back before charging up his magic and asking Geku if all he really wants is to humiliate him with a beatdown. After saying that he wants to take Eterna, as well as Kurumi over to the ghost trailers, Geku also charges up his magic and suddenly grows a pair of wings before turning Takeshi into a human sandbag until he falls unconscious. Once again, Kurumi runs over to him, so Geku holds her back and kicks him several meters away. However, Kurumi still rushes over and suddenly starts kissing him until her powers turn her into his clone. Upon seeing this, Geku gets pissed and knocks her out as well before carrying her off with Eterna. In a dream minutes later, Eterna shows Takeshi a scene from the future where Geku acknowledges Yoko, so he frantically asks for her help, but she tells him to come find her first. By then, Mui has just reached the hallway, but upon seeing Violet standing over him, she prepares herself for a fight. Violet then summons a bloodthirsty nun from hell to fight her off, but Mui manages to hold her off until she sees Violet picking Takeshi up. As she tries to reach him, the nun pulls her down with a whip and prepares to finish her off, but then she suddenly gets torn apart by powerful beams from three mages. After the hot blonde leading them creates a small dust storm to confuse Violet, she drops Takeshi and runs off, so Mui rushes over to wake him up. Kasaki then introduces herself as a witch from Camelot, right before Suganashi shows up and thanks her for the help. As they both continue smiling at each other, Mui explains that she is actually his ex, but as Takeshi tries to get up, his injuries cause him to pass out again, so Kasaki and her girls carry him to a special hospital while Mui sees the device Takao gave Kurumi. 3 days later, Takeshi wakes up and gets shocked to see Mui dressed like a nurse from the hub, so she explains that it was the only outfit she could find after they left the ruined world. This further confuses him, as he initially thought they were in one of the Academy's healthcare centers, but she tells him how Kasaki and her girls brought him to the regular world so they wouldn't have to worry about getting attacked by any magic users. He then notices how sad she has been and grabs her face to comfort her before Kazumi suddenly rushes inside while bawling his eyes out. After a couple more seconds of losing every aura point he ever racked up, he explains how two low-budget men in black grabbed Futaba at the Academy and said something about being from the Investigation Bureau before knocking him out. Upon hearing this, Mui explains that they are actually a specialized magic agency that trains people with exceptionally high magic. When Kazumi still insists that they were wrong for taking Futaba, they remind him that she would have been in more danger staying with them since they barely even know what is going to happen next. Just then, Suganashi walks in with Kisaki to check on him, and after explaining the current situation at the academy, they both tell Kazumi and Mui to remain in the hospital with Takeshi until he makes a full recovery. He then asks if they have any idea where Geku took Kurumi, but Suganashi tells him not to bother stressing over it because the ghost trailers have hideouts all over the ruined world. While he continues explaining how dangerous it would be to leave the hospital in a hurry, Mui remembers the device from earlier but decides to keep it to herself. Later that night, Takeshi gets tired of sitting around and tries to sneak out, but then he overhears Kisaki telling Suganashi that he has to leave because Camelot is a girls-only institution. After Suganashi convinces her to let him finish recovering, he realizes how pointless any sudden moves would be and returns to the room. The next day, Kazuma regains enough strength to address the ghost trailers, and after he gives them orders to start the war, Kippy crosses over to the regular world for an important part of the mission. Minutes later, he tears through the magicians in a small mansion before finding Wise, the great magician behind the spell stopping magicians from fighting in the regular world. When he explains how the war will finally give all magicians freedom to use their magic as they please and reign supreme as the top species, Wise calls him a lunatic. With the last of his energy, he tells Kippy that the war will only end in more bloodshed. But Kippy tells him that they already accepted that before stabbing into his heart. Just then, Wise's spell breaks down and magicians from the ruined world immediately start jumping through portals to fight in the sky. By morning, Takeshi hears about the fighting and immediately remembers that nightmare where Geku attacked Yoko. So he asks Suganashi for permission to go back home. He immediately tries to say no, but then Kisaki offers to escort him, so he agrees to it. A couple hours later, Takeshi returns home, and Yoko initially tries to express her concern, but their damaged relationship makes it hard for either one of them to admit that they missed each other. Kisaki then hands her a formal request from the Bishop of Camelot asking that she trains Takeshi. After reminding them that she doesn't even have her magic anymore, she asks why they would even think she was good enough to train him. So Kisaki turns to Takeshi and asks if he wants her to train him. He then says he is ready to do whatever as long as he can save Kurumi. So Yoko grabs a ring from the letter and decides to help him. In a dojo much later, she explains that the ring gives her temporary control over magic before asking if he has considered the fact that he would be risking his life while trying to save Kurumi. After he once again claims that it will all be worth it if he saves her, she proceeds to beat him around for the rest of the day as he still barely has any control over his magic. Later that evening, she suddenly drops in the dojo, so Kisaki rushes in to ask why she is pushing herself despite knowing that the ring is draining her life force in exchange for the limited use of magic. Around the same time, Mui finally shows Takeshi the device and explains that it's actually used for teleportation, which likely means it could be a way into the hideout Geku took Kurumi to. When he asks why she didn't mention it sooner, she reminds him of how impatient he always is in high-risk situations. After she apologizes for turning his entire life upside down by introducing him to magic and starts bawling her eyes out, he cleans her tears and thanks her for always protecting him since they first met. In a dream the following day, Kurumi finds Takeshi's body lying beside her and freaks out before waking up and seeing that she looks just like him. Just then, Geku shows up and gets excited to see that she is up but proceeds to ask if she can switch back to her regular form because he doesn't want to get freaky with his brother's body. Upon hearing this, she sits back on the bed and wonders if the kiss gave her this new ability to clone people. But Geku continues confessing his obsessive love, so she tells him to stop pretending because he only sees her as a trophy he can collect from Takeshi. When he completely denies this and says he would never want something that belonged to his loser older brother, she asks if that same logic applies to Eterna, which he also stole after the fight. Upon hearing this, he gets pissed and blows up the room, so she runs off to escape him and ends up bumping into Takao. After he explains that they are in the Ghost Trailers' headquarters, she asks to be hidden away from Geku, so he takes her to his room and admits that he remembers everything from before the wizard brace wiped his memory. However, he still offers to help, but then they hear the door and somehow end up cuddling on the floor right before Hotaru walks in. Around the same time, Takeshi grabs lunch but starts thinking about how Geku nearly sent him to the other side, until Kisaki shows up with Suganashi to ask if he is ready to take on the Ghost Trailers. He then says he only wants to protect Kurumi and wants nothing to do with the war, since he barely knows anything about both the Ghost Trailers and Wizard Braces. After he leaves with his food, Suganashi tells her that he clearly only wants to fight for the people he holds dear. But Kisaki reminds him what happens whenever a powerful magician refuses to pick a side. Back in Geku's room, Hotaru has just finished laughing at how Kurumi turned herself into Takeshi, so Takao asks if she will help with their escape plan for her. She then explains how she started hating Geku after he showed up and suddenly became Kippy's favorite. Minutes later, they both walk her through the building and explain how it was designed to look like a maze, until Takao hears Geku's voice and tells them both to hide. He then tries to distract Geku, but he catches a glimpse of Kurumi's skirt and starts calling out to her, so Hotaru tells her to put the lipstick on for a magic trick. The next moment, she locks lips with Kurumi and waits until she completes the transformation before admitting that she has always wanted to know what it feels like. After she runs off, Geku catches up and immediately continues his search, so Takao takes Kurumi out to find an exit. But Kippy suddenly asks to speak with him, so he wishes her luck before leaving. She then tries to find a way out on her own, but after several minutes of running across the walls, her transformation magic wears off, so she casually walks back inside a random room only to meet Kazuma, who then invites her to a special place in the building. Back in the regular world, Takeshi has just completed his first spell, but Yoko tells him to focus on making it a lot faster with an incantation. She then activates a spell of her own and makes him control the flow of magic until he starts levitating. Seeing this causes her to remember when he would play around with Geku, and when he eventually notices the sudden mood shift, she decides to stop training for the day. As she turns to leave, he asks why she never told them about her life as a magician, and when she claims it's because she was never that good at it, he tells her to stop the cab. However, she suddenly collapses, so he rushes over to grab her, and when she tries to tell him something about the day of Geku's accident, he stops her and says they can discuss it later. By then, Kurumi has just realized that the person she has been following is Kazuma, so she asks what he could possibly want with her. Hours later, Takeshi makes up his mind to rescue her, and when Mui suddenly shows up to check on him, He thanks her for all the help and promises to get Kurumi back safely. After she decides to go with him, Kazumi also shows up to help him, so he uses the teleportation device to open a portal into the ghost trailers' 8 key. Just then, Takao and Hotaru show up, so Takeshi throws the device at him and asks for Kurumi. Takao then admits to being surprised that they would risk coming to HQ without backup and says he has been itching for a rematch. But Takeshi explains that they only want Kurumi. After Hotaru says she can take care of Mui, Takao charges in to fight Takeshi, so Kazumi decides to help Mui. While they both take her on, Takeshi continues trading slices with Takao and barely manages to stay on his feet because his new sword isn't even half as strong as Eterna. Despite this, he manages to keep Takao on his toes, so Kazumi decides to stop playing with Hotaru and unleashes a powerful explosion that knocks her down. She then switches to verbal assault, but he decides to keep things physical and shuts her brain off with a brutal headbutt. The next moment, Mui rushes over to help Takeshi, but he tells her to wait until Takao creates a powerful barrier that nearly cracks his sword in half. After he says that no attack has ever gotten past it, Takeshi gives Mui the signal and charges towards him, while she uses an incantation to fire off a plasma beam packed with her magic. Takeshi then combines it with his abilities and shatters Takao's shield in an instant, leaving him at a loss for words. After Kazumi carries Hotaru back to humiliate her, Takeshi once again asks for Kurumi's whereabouts, so Takao explains everything that happened after he saw her and apologizes for not keeping her safe. Takeshi then thanks him for at least trying to protect her and heads off with Mui and Kazumi to keep looking. Shortly after this, he returns to the regular world and rushes back home since the nightmare about Geku's attack on Yoko is the only lead he has left. But by the time he finally reaches the house, Geku walks out the front door with blood all over his clothes and says it's already too late. Upon seeing this, Takeshi starts asking for Yoko, so Geku explains that he was only trying to defend himself when she attacked him. Once again, Takeshi demands to know what he did to Yoko, and when Geku tells him not to worry since it wasn't a fatal hit, Takeshi prepares to attack him, so he unleashes his magic and reveals Eterna, who he already modified with his abilities. Seeing this surprises Takeshi, but the real shock sets in when he summons Eterna in her human form and forces her to attack him. After she drops in with a powerful blast and raises her sword to chop his head off, Geku pulls her back into the sword and suddenly tells Takeshi that he wasn't actually responsible for the accident that broke his leg. As soon as the words leave his mouth, Takeshi freezes and asks what he's talking about. So Geku explains how Yoko asked the Bishop of Camelot to unalive him on that very day. However, after he only ended up with a damaged leg, she apparently decided to let them continue believing that Takeshi was the one behind everything. Takeshi then asks why she would ever want to unalive her own son. And while Geku tells him how all his torture techniques couldn't get anything out of her, she thinks back to the day she had one of Eterna's nightmares and promised herself to never let Geku become Kazuma. Back outside the house, Takeshi gets tired of Geku's ranting and says he only ever looks for reasons to hurt people, and this causes Geku to lose it. So he tries to chop Takeshi in half, but ends up splitting the entire block as Takeshi dodges the attack. While they both start powering up their magic, Takeshi starts having second thoughts as he remembers all the good memories he shared with Geku. But after seeing the bloodlust in his eyes, he accepts that his little brother is long gone and charges in to attack with all his strength. In a matter of seconds, they both go airborne and continue exchanging hits at the speed of sound. But unlike their first fight, Takeshi manages to get the upper hand by predicting every single one of Geku's moves. After he draws first blood, Geku tries to teleport to a safe distance, but Takeshi once again predicts it and charges toward him before he even appears. However, just as he tries to land the final slice, a lightning bolt separates them before Mui and every member of the wizard brace appears to fight Kippy and the ghost trailers in one final battle. When Mui tries to help him, Suganashi stops her and says they have to focus on the ghost trailers, so Takeshi continues fighting Geku while the sky suddenly starts looking like it's the 4th of July. Amidst all the commotion, Kurumi desperately tries to find Takeshi, while Mui rushes to help Kazumi as he starts taking one too many hits. Right then, Geku suddenly stops fighting and tells Takeshi that he is only doing this because he has already gone too far and no longer feels redeemable. But then Takeshi promises to forgive everything that happened and stretches out his hand to prove it. After he also turns off his magic, Geku slowly flies toward him while secretly charging Eterna up. But just as he gets close enough to attack, Kurumi rushes in to save Takeshi and gets stabbed instead. Upon seeing this, Geku immediately starts apologizing while Takeshi tries to keep her from slipping away. Mui also notices this and gets distracted from her fight, so Suganashi takes over and tells her to go help Kurumi. As she then rushes over and starts using healing magic on her, Takeshi heads back up to face Geku and completely loses it, While both brothers continue unleashing dangerous amounts of magic, Kurumi gives Mui one last message for Takeshi, causing her to start crying as the pain of losing her becomes unbearable. Just then, Takeshi finally slams Geku out of the sky and decides to end it all. But then Geku returns to his narcissistic state and starts blaming Takeshi for everything before also unleashing all of his magic to fight back. As both their powers start building up to doomsday-level explosions, Momoka decides to put an end to it all and says something about helping Kazuma before firing off a black hole that nearly obliterates the entire city in seconds. After the dust settles, they all start searching for Takeshi and Geku. Meanwhile, Kazuma just finished healing Yoko, so he joins Violet outside and says it's time to start rebuilding the future before asking why she is so loyal to him despite everything he has ever done. She then reminds him of the time he saved her life and says she will always stay at his side regardless of what he becomes in the future. Minutes later, Takeshi wakes up on a bench somewhere in the academy and struggles to believe his eyes as he looks around and wonders how everything is still in one piece. The next moment, a young version of Yoko runs out, followed by an even younger version of Makoto, who then calls her senpai and asks for help with some pamphlets before they both walk right past Takeshi. After sitting back down on the bench and making sure he hasn't gone insane, Takeshi tries to wrap his head around everything currently happening and almost loses it when he looks up and sees a poster saying it's 1998. The next moment, he sees Kippy walking with a younger version of Momoka, who then starts asking him to leave her alone until Tsukiyomi shows up and tells him to stop being a creep. Upon seeing his face, Takeshi remembers that he is the guy that got murked while trying to save Yoko, so he continues listening to their conversation until Kazuma also shows up. After hearing him speak, Takeshi finally starts piecing everything together and realizes that he somehow went back in time. The next moment, Geku suddenly runs out to meet Kazuma and the others, so Takeshi immediately lowers his head and tries to hide his shock as they start walking by. However, after they all walk past him, Geku looks back and says he has been expecting him. Takeshi then thinks back to when Yoko tried to tell him something about Geku and wonders if there's a lot more to who he really is. Meanwhile, Kurumi and Mui make it to the edge of the crater Momoka created and try to figure out what happened to him. Is Geku actually Takeshi's brother or a literal demon that Kazuma and Momoka have been trying to defeat this entire time? Comment part 2 to find out, and don't forget to turn on post notifications after subscribing to make sure you never miss any of our recaps.